We are opening up to the 6th chapter of John's Gospel. Therein we find the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is come into the world." Every once in a while, when we are growing up, people ask us, "What is our favorite subject at school?" Many of us give the answer, lunch and recess. Now, I could find out the most popular activity at recess. There was no way to find out if it was basketball, softball, swing sets, or just leaning against the fence and talking. But data does exist for the favorite school lunch. When I was a kid, the favorites were macaroni and cheese, or hamburgers and tater tots, or chili with peanut butter and honey sandwiches. Now we have information about the most popular school lunch in all 50 states. One study shows that the favorite for Nebraska happens to be the chicken sandwich. For Kansas and Iowa, the favorites are something called Bosco sticks. Bosco sticks are pizza in a stick. And we can see that pizza is still a favorite in some other states. Every day across the nation, millions of school lunches are served 9 months of the year. It takes a lot of work to make sure lunch remains a favorite subject. As the students fill their minds in education throughout the day, they also need to fill their stomachs with a good school lunch. When we read the story about the feeding of the 5,000, we read about Jesus serving a lunch. All day long, Jesus had been wearing his rabbi hat and teaching the people. When it was evening, people needed lunch. So Jesus provides a school lunch. By working his miracle, Jesus shows he can run the food supply chain. Jesus proves he can provide physical bread. Jesus proves he can be our source for spiritual bread. He proves he is the bread of life. Indeed, Jesus has been teaching all day by the Sea of Galilee. It has been a good day, and the sun will be setting soon. Jesus has satisfied their minds with spiritual food, but now their bodies are looking for a satisfying after-school lunch. Jesus starts the discussion with Philip. "What's for lunch? How is the budget? Do you think we could feed all these people?" Philip answers, "It will take 200 denarii, 8 months' wages." To refresh our memory, 1 denarius was a single day's wage. In today's dollars, 8 hours of work at $12 an hour equals $96. We take that $96 times 200 denarii, and we have $19,200. That's a massive budget request. They're going to have to find some kind of lunch wagons or school buses to carry all this food. Think about how the fast food restaurants feel when school buses pull up and start ordering fish dinners or burgers for 100 at a time. To get food for all these people without transportation and fast food restaurants must have been something. Fortunately, Jesus is not limited by the physical supply chain. Jesus has access to the spiritual supply chain. First, Jesus does ask about the physical supplies. What do we have? The answer is 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus goes to work breaking up that food into small pieces. Somehow, those first baskets of food keep multiplying into more and more food. Jesus uses his own spiritual connection to God's supply chain to make something wonderful happen. This is a new thought. Jesus might be the ultimate school lunch lady. How many of us have fond memories of those moms and grandmothers who used to make school lunches the old-fashioned way? Think about it. Jesus made enough lunches to feed 100 school buses. Take 50 passengers times 100 buses, we get the 5,000. Feeding the 5,000 is a massive teaching moment. Jesus taught teamwork to his disciples by having them cook a church dinner together. As he passed out the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he was demonstrating what has happened in every church kitchen since that moment. People have bonded and built the church around the dinner table. The feeding of the 5,000 foreshadows what Jesus did at that Last Supper. He used the breaking of the bread to unite the spiritual community. The feeding of the 5,000 was a practice run for that night of Holy Communion. Jesus also sets up his after-dinner talk. Later in John 6:35, Jesus will say, "I am the bread of life." Jesus proves that he is the master of the spiritual supply chain. As the bread of life, he is the spiritual bread supply for the spiritual food chain. Serving this big school lunch to the 5,000 was part of the lesson plan. Jesus is our spiritual teacher and our lunch lady at the same time. He gives us the physical food we need, the educational food we need, and the spiritual food to go with it. Jesus demonstrates, I am the bread for your life. I am the spiritual food supply that never runs out. The cupboard is never empty. God's steadfast love never comes to an end. God's steadfast love is never out of supply. The feeding of the 5,000 is the beginning of the all-you-can-eat buffet that we know as Jesus' table. Jesus' love is the bread of our life, and it will never grow stale. Amen.